Hey y'all, welcome back to another ballistics gel test. Today I'm doing something I've never done before, and that is combining two different loads into one video. We're going to be shooting Hornady Superformance CX bullets in 223 Remington, and the reason I'm combining them is because they make two loads that are almost exactly the same, a 50 grain load and a 55 grain load. We're going to shoot them head to head and see what happens. And here is the box, or rather boxes, for both of these Hornady Superformance CX bullet loads. The boxes are identical except for the information on them. So you can see 50 grain, 55 grain, California approved. If you live there, this may be an option for you. Let's flip it around and take a look at the ballistics information. So the 50 grain bullet is rated at 3,300 feet per second, while the 55 grain bullet is rated at 3,250. So a difference of only 50 feet per second, at least per the factory. We'll see how fast they actually go. And the information on the back of both boxes is the same. It's just promo info on Hornady's different Superformance bullets that they offer. And then I'm not going to yank out the cartridge holders for each like I usually do. What I'm going to do, but what I will do, is show you the actual ammo I've yanked out of the boxes already. So the one on the left is the 50 grain, the one on the right is the 55 grain. They are identical except for, let me see if I can get the camera to focus. I'm holding it really close to the lens. That lighter weight bullet on the left is crimped into the cantilever, and then on the right, the case is either crimped above that or just on the edge of that. So you can tell a difference at a glance based on where the bullet is crimped in the case mouth. But other than that, they're identical. Let's shoot them and see how they do. And the test rifle today is my CZ527 carbine. It's got an 18 or 18.5 inch barrel, I don't exactly recall. Chambered in 223, of course. Up top, I've got a Vortex Crossfire 2 3-9x40 scope. And coming on back, I've got one of my leather cartridge pouch cuffs, which incidentally perfectly holds a CZ527 magazine, coincidentally enough, so it works for that as well. Check out my website, masonleather.com. I would absolutely love to make you one. And coming around to the other side, I've got to show you, I've got my wild bore design. We'll be taking 3 shots from 100 yards, firing into 10% ballistics gel that has been calibrated to meet the FBI's ballistics testing protocol. And while ballistics gel isn't an exact proxy for big game, it does provide a repeatable medium through which to test various bullets and ammo against each other. After the shots, we'll examine bullet expansion, weight retention, penetration, and velocity. My goal is to provide hunters like you and I with the most objective information possible to help us make the best choice for our particular hunting situation. The ballistics gel in this video has been sourced from Clear Ballistics. You can find a link in the description. So let's go ahead and shoot it. And let's look at the velocities for that Hornady Superformance 50 grain CX load. Our high was 3144, our low was 3100, and our average was 3118. And let's look at the velocities for the 55 grain Hornady Superformance CX load. Our high was 3174, our low was 3086, and our average was 3123. And we are down here at the blocks after shooting both the 50 grain and 55 grain Hornady Superformance CX loads out of the 223. Let's go ahead and take a look at the 50 grain blocks first. And we managed to capture 2 bullets. I had one slip out the top. Penetration wise, they're both back here in the second block. They are right at about, we'll give it 20 and 20.5 inches respectively. They're right next to each other. And then the third bullet slipped out of the block right here, so it penetrated somewhere past 21 inches before it zipped out of the top. But since we don't have it, I'm not going to count it. We're going to go with these two. And then coming over to the first block, not much wound cavity. They started expanding right about, I moved the tape measure already. Let me put it back. It looks like they start opening up at about the 2-inch mark. They cruise on back, and then they've sort of petered out with their energy by about the 8 to 10 inch mark. There's a little difference between each of the two wound tracks, but the wound tracks did not blow up very big, and I've noticed that is sort of the trend with solid copper monolithic bullets. They don't have just devastating wound cavities, but what they do is penetrate deep and hold together. And coming on over to the 55 grain CX bullets over here in the other blocks, we captured 4 because I thought one had slipped out probably based on my shot. So I went ahead and fired another, but we actually caught all 4 that I shot. So we'll go ahead and use all 4. And sorry about the shadow. The sun is going down and I'm blocking it. There's nothing really I can do about it. But here's 3 of them right here. And then the 4th one is a little shallower. It's right there. So penetration wise, that one made it to about the 20.5-inch mark. And then these 3 here were about, we'll give that 23.5, we'll give that 24, and this one will give 24 as well. So pretty good penetration for a 55 grain bullet. Coming on back to the first block, similar story to the 50 grain CX bullets, not much in terms of wound cavity. They open up at about the 2.5-inch mark. Come on back, energy peters out, and by the 8-inch mark, they're kind of just penetrating through and have dumped their energy, it looks like. So same story, just not very, massive, explosive wound cavity, but they did penetrate deep, that's for sure. And here we are looking at those Hornady Superformance CX bullets recovered from the ballistics shell. We're looking at the 50 grain bullets on top, the 2 bullets on top, and the 55 grain bullets on the bottom row, all 4 of those that we recovered. So first we'll go over weight retention. For the 50 grain bullets, we saw 46 and 49 grains for an average of 48 grains. That works out to 95% weight retention. I'd really expect nothing less from a solid copper bullet at this point. And honestly, I think 95% weight retention is the lowest I've seen from any solid copper bullet I have tested so far. And then onto the 55 grain bullets, we saw 55 grains across the board for all 4 recovered bullets. So 55 grain average, 100% weight retention. And then onto expansion. For the 50 grain bullets on top, we saw 0.4 inches and 0.41 inches for an average of 0.41 inches expanded diameter rounded up. That works out to 1.8x expansion. And then for the 55 grain bullets, we saw 0.42, 0.42, 0.43 and 0.43 inches expanded diameter, averaging out to, really it's 0.425 inches expanded diameter on average. Very, very consistent expansion across the board, and that works out to 1.9x expansion, just a hair more than the 50 grain bullet. And now on to velocity. For the 50 grain bullets, we saw 3144 for the high, 3100 for the low, an average of 3118 versus the factory build velocity of 3,300 feet per second. So we came in 182 feet per second slow from the 18-inch barrel of my CZ. And then for the 55 grain bullets, we saw 3174 for the high, 3086 for the low, for an average of 3123 versus the factory build velocity of 3,250 feet per second. So once again, slow, 127 feet per second slow. And then on to penetration. For the 50 grain bullets, we saw 20 inches and 20.5 inches. So rounding up to the nearest half inch for average, we saw 20.5 inches on average. Actually, a little bit surprising that it went that deep being such a light bullet. Onto the 55 grain bullet, we saw 20.5, 23.5, and 24 inches, and then 24 inches for the 4th bullet for an average of 23 inches of penetration. And then kinetic energy wise, for the 50 grain bullet going on average 3,118 feet per second, that works out to 1,083 foot-pounds of kinetic energy, which is on the lower end of 223 bullets that I've seen marketed for sort of deer hunting. And this ammo is not necessarily marketed for that, but being a solid copper bullet, I think it's sort of meant for that. And this is a fairly low kinetic energy number for a medium game 223 load. But again, I think you could argue whether or not this is even supposed to be for medium game. Who really knows? And then for the 55 grain bullet going on average 3,123 feet per second, that works out to 1,191 foot-pounds of energy at the muzzle, which is a lot more in line with the deer-oriented 223 loads that I have tested. They tend to average around the 1,200 foot-pound mark, which we're right there at that. All right, time for my final thoughts on those Hornady Superformance CX loads. So this was a double header video. We did both the 50 and 55 grain versions of the same ammo. I think it's interesting that Hornady made both 50 and 55 grain versions. You would think they would, open up the weight range a little bit more. We'll get into that in a second, why I think they might not have done that. But let's get into it. So weight retention wise, very high for both of them. 95% for the 50 grainer. It did shed a little bit more weight. Some little pieces did break off of it. They're going super fast, not ultra surprising there. The 55 grainer maintained 100% of its weight, excellent performance. And then expansion wise, they performed very, very similarly. The 50 grain came in at 1.8x expansion. The 55 was 1.9x expansion, so almost identical. And then velocity wise, they both came in a little bit slower than their factory rated velocity, 182 feet per second slow for the 50 grain, 127 feet per second slow for the 55 grain. At this point, that's sort of par for the course. It's expected. We're not going to hit that factory rated velocity, especially with 223. I haven't seen it. With some other calibers, you do get close or sometimes exceed it. With 223, you kind of don't hit it. And yes, if we were shooting from a longer barrel, we very well might have seen higher velocities, but most people these days shooting 223 are doing it from a 16 or 18 inch barrel. Yeah, there's 24-inch barreled varmint rigs out there, but I don't think people with those rifles are going to be shooting this particular ammo most of the time. So I think this is a good test and good data point for the velocity. And then on to penetration. No surprise, the 50 grain didn't go quite as deep as the 55, but it was still good penetration. We got 20.5 inches for the 50 grain and 23 inches for the 55 grain. Pretty darn good. That's a lot higher than a lot of other 223 deer-oriented loads that I've tested. And make no mistake, this is sort of meant for medium game hunting with the 223. And then on to kinetic energy, the 50 grain bullet came in at 1,083 foot-pounds at the muzzle. That is, I believe, the weakest 223 load I have tested so far. And then the 55 grainer came in at 1,191 foot-pounds, which is a lot closer to the sort of 1,200 foot-pound range that I've seen with most 223 loads. So why would Hornady make a 50 grain and a 55 grain in this Superformance CX lineup? Well, for those that don't know, a lot of your solid copper alloy bullets, you can get very finicky accuracy out of different rifles depending on the twist rate, whether or not your rifle just likes the particular ammo. It seems to be a lot more finicky than standard lead and copper bullets. So maybe what Hornady was doing is saying, you know, someone might have a slower twist rate in an old bolt action. For example, I've got an old Browning A-bolt in 223 that's got a 1 in 12 twist rate. It probably wouldn't shoot the 55 grain version of this accurately. It might shoot the 50 grain version accurately. I think maybe that's what they're trying to do here, is just give an option to people that do have a slower twist rate. But personally for me, if I'm going to be using a solid copper monolithic bullet in 223 to hunt deer or other medium game, if at all possible, I'm going to try and get a heavier bullet weight so I can just have that much more mass, more muzzle energy, and a bit more penetration. If it were me, I'd want something like a 62 grain or a 70 grain bullet. Your 1 in 7 twist barrels that are so common these days should stabilize both of those. Your 1 in 9 twist might. Give them both a shot and see what happens. But if you or anyone you know has used this particular ammo on game, let us know in the comments how it did for you. Hey, if you enjoy these videos, check out my website masonleather.com and get yourself some leather gear handmade by me just for you. I've been handcrafting leather gear for hunters for over a decade and I would love to make you something. The link is in the video description. And check out my channel for more hunting ammo ballistics gel tests. I have some big news. Lots of you have emailed me or commented how much value you get out of my videos. And you've asked me, how can you be a part of this and help support the channel? Well, I got to work and now I have a way. I've created a Patreon account where you can join me in helping our fellow hunters. Click the link in this video's description and watch my Patreon welcome video, where I describe to you how your help will impact this channel and our community of hunters as a whole. And when you join me on Patreon, you'll get a lot more than I can give you here on YouTube. You'll have to go watch that welcome video linked in the description to find out the details. I'll see you there.